everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Social Wave Project podcast. And I really cannot speak, but I've got the COVID, but I'm COVID free now, but I literally got the COVID brain. But to celebrate like so many achievements, I thought that today's guest, I would bring on someone very special. So who better to bring on than Lauren? Lauren, hello.
Thank you. Hi.
Oh, well, you're keeping well. And I love your earphones as well. Very pink.
Thank you. Thank you. I do like to have everything matching, everything pink.
I mean, pink is like a really good color. You really cannot go on with wrong with pink, really.
Exactly.
COVID brain. Oh well, never mind. But Lauren is a digital creator for a Instagram profile called Neurodiversity with Lozza. Is that I've pronounced
Lozza,
it?
yeah.
Lozza. But
Yeah.
can you tell us a bit more about the history of it, like how it started and
Yeah. So I actually only got diagnosed as autistic last November. So it's not quite been a year yet, but I started up the account about a week before I was diagnosed, just because I thought I would kind of document the process in case I did get diagnosed. So I wasn't really thinking it was going to go anywhere. I just kind of started it and thought, well, if I talk about the diagnostic process, that's fine. If not, I'll just kind of see how it goes. So I was kind of thinking that if I didn't get a diagnosis, I would probably stop the account. But then, of course, I ended up getting diagnosed and everything. So I've just kind of carried on posting since. I think at the start, I kind of started thinking like, okay, I'll post about autism, put some more information about there, things like that. So my first post started off just basic things like, so what actually is autism, what's masking, things like that. And then since then, I think obviously the political situation has descended into madness slightly. So since then, I've just been kind of picking up on political issues, other issues that face the disabled community as a whole, and just writing about those. Because I mean, I've always been very interested in what's kind of going on in the world, and I've always been very interested in keeping myself up to date with things. So I think now that I have the opportunity to write about things and post it, I really enjoy doing it. So from there, it's just kind of stemmed into writing more really about things that are going on, how it impacts the disabled community, other issues, and kind of looking at autism and disability from a different lens. So kind of obviously making sure that you're looking at it from an intersectional standpoint. So making sure that we are taking into account everybody of different genders, different races, making sure that we look at it in that way. So I've really enjoyed talking to loads of different people in the disabled community, like hearing loads of other different people's experiences. So I'm kind of hoping that the work that I do there kind of shows that really. But yeah, and then I'm just kind of here now.
Well, that's a really, really good story, actually. But I know that when it comes to having a diagnosis in late life, really, especially with autism and females, because I'm quite the
Yeah.
opposite, I was diagnosed early, but it can be very, very hard to identify autism in females, really. And I know there's a lot of content creators who have covered this, but there are like autistic people and also people in the disability communities as well. They have a voice to share, and I know in your case, Lauren, you've got a lot of things to share, especially with things that matter like the LGBT community, autism.
Yeah. So I do really like looking into different things like that. Again, I think it being kind of late diagnosed for me, because I never know whether to say that I'm late diagnosed or not, because I was still 20 when I was diagnosed. So I always kind of think, is that late or not? I'm not sure, because I know of a lot of people that were diagnosed like much later in life, like very late identified. But for me, it was just a case of coming to university and finally realizing that I did need a lot more assistance than what I thought I did. And then it's just things like looking back now, I've realized that it was very, very obvious that I was autistic, but just because of like my experiences at school and things like that, because I was, say, classed as a high achiever at school and my behaviour wasn't so much of an issue. It was never really brought up, despite the fact that I did visibly struggle sometimes at school. So I think that's been kind of a barrier for me in a way. I think a lot with things like teachers might not really look into things if you're not causing like a behavioural issue for them or anything, which is a really poor way to look at it. It doesn't do anybody any favours. So that's just kind of me being later diagnosed. But then, of course, since then, I do like looking into it, how autism maybe ties into the LGBT community. I mean, I'd say, honestly, the vast majority of autistic people that I know identify as trans or non-binary. So there's actually a lot of overlap between many different communities within the disabled community. And I think we need to discuss that a lot.
Because I know that in later episodes I will cover episodes on the LGBT community, especially since the ban controversial therapy, I think it is, the campaign's ongoing at the moment. So that's a recent topic that's going around, and that affects everyone in the mainstream and the disability LGBT community.
Definitely does, yeah.
So definitely important.
Yeah, it is.
But I was really quite curious though, because I know that for myself, I actually have worked in the politics field myself, and I did something called the UK Youth Parliament when I was about 15, 16. I was like, I don't know what you call it, but like a deputy, like youth member of parliament or something like that.
There's the British Youth Council now. They do a lot of things like that. I don't know if it's the same as what you're on about, because I think I have heard about that separately as well. But yeah, they're like really good ways for young people to get involved. I always think they look fun, but they're also a really good way to get involved with things.
Oh yeah, but I know that it was kind of like, at the time it was very prejudiced in a way, not in a horrible way, but it's excluding, because everyone wanted to talk about issues like raising money fair for transport. That's a like a fantasy thing that's never going to happen. But when you look on serious issues like the disability LGBT rights community, again, this is another example, even though it's a repeat. These issues are very important. But then with the campaigning, what made you start campaigning for disability rights, Lauren? Did someone inspire you to do that?
So I actually have a friend called Georgina Wasdell. She's a disabled model. She works with Zebedee Talent. We've been family friends for years, since we were like really small in primary school. So like their family is very similar to ours. So there's me and my sister and my mum and dad, and then her family is also the same. So Georgina's a couple of years older than me. But Georgina was diagnosed with chronic fatigue as a teenager, and she struggled so much with trying to access support, finding doctors that would treat her right and actually like treat her with respect. And then Georgina really kind of blossomed when she applied with Zebedee, and since then she's had so many amazing opportunities, and she's worked so incredibly hard. So she's done loads of modeling with other influencers like Lucy Dawson. So she's done lots of model shoots with those various different activities and projects that she's been involved in. So Georgina now has really like blossomed into, she's incredible. So I think seeing Georgina when I was younger as well, because obviously Georgina was a teenager, but I'm a couple of years under, so younger. So seeing Georgina do all of that, for me, it was just like, wow, that's incredible. And of course, at the time, I didn't know that I was disabled. And then, of course, it came to me finding out that I'm autistic and disabled. And Georgina was like the closest person to me that I know that's disabled as well. So it was lovely to know that if I needed anything, I had Georgina there as well. Of course, the support of family and friends and things, but it was just nice to know that I had Georgina there as someone that understands. So for me, when I was reflecting back on things, thinking, how did no one notice I was autistic? I realized that I'd actually experienced ableism my entire life, but it was never officially put down as ableism in my mind because I didn't know I was disabled. So there's so many times now looking back where I'm thinking, I've actually experienced this for my entire life now. So now I'm thinking, well, I'm actually in a position where I feel like I can fight some of that a bit. And there are loads of people that are being very public about being disabled, like Georgina and like Lucy. And there's so many autistic creators as well. There's Cheryl, This Line Is Mine. I mean, she's just been on Blue Peter, and that was incredible for me to watch, just to see that finally some good autistic representation on TV, and Cheryl was incredible on Blue Peter. So I think now we're getting to a point where we're finally getting people in the public eye, and it feels like more of a time where now that I'm trying to be more independent, I might have a shot at trying to fight some of this, and now that I kind of know myself more as well. So that's kind of where I've started the campaigning from, and I've just kind of had more of an opportunity to do that.
With the campaigning, ableism is such a hard issue to tackle, but
Yeah.
it's so amazing to see how far like so many people have come, really. It's a huge achievement.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it definitely is. I think it's one of those things where you want to tackle it, but it's so ingrained in literally every single part of daily life that you kind of can't. You have to chip away and do tiny things. So achievements like having Georgina be a model and being photographed, and then she's being published, like she's been in magazines and things, that's incredible, because now that's someone that you can look at and think, wow, that's a gorgeous disabled model in the public eye. And we've not really had tons of disabled representation in the past. So now there's all of these extremely talented disabled people that are coming forward, and it's chipping away at just the attitudes a bit of people, so that they're finally looking at people and being like, oh, like, well, that's a disabled person. That's not what I would think that a disabled person would look like. And I think that's a really good place that we're getting to at the minute, especially with representation. It's obviously we're not all the way there, but we're definitely getting better at it. So I'm kind of hoping to maybe assist with that in like an activism side. Because obviously I don't think I'm cut out to be a model or anything like that.
Oh no, don't say that. I think you cut out to be a model.
Just not sure if it's my field I should really go into, but I do really like the idea of kind of being more public about it, especially if I've got the opportunity and the energy to do that. I think that's what I want to try and do.
For the other model as well as Georgina, another example, Holly Smale, who I interviewed in the last season. Now, she came out as autistic recently, but she was a child model, which she inspired to use the Geek Girl series.
I was going to say I remember the Geek Girl series. Yeah.
It was really good though, because when you look at some things and stuff, really, it kind of makes you think by reading a book or looking at someone, you kind of like think, oh, okay, well, I can relate to this person. Does
Yeah.
that mean there's good representation of autism, and whether it's based on something you see in the media or in literature or anything like that, really? But it's like you said, Lauren, we still got a long, long way to go, despite
Yeah.
with all the changes and the things that are happening as well. But then jumping onto that, really, because I know that one of your posts that you posted on Instagram was about a current law that was
Yes.
updated in the Houses of Parliament from at the time of the recording, which is nearly a month ago, and that's
Yeah.
is called the Bill of Rights. And
Yeah.
looking at that, the Bill of Rights was a little bit confusing, but from what I did with my research, because of your post, Lauren, and then on the government website as well, it's a law that still exists, but it's been updated. And
Yeah.
some of the bits that were written, they had printed out some misinformation, or some bits have been misprinted, and if
Yeah.
that's the right word to put it, really. But I know you yourself, Lauren, you know the Bill of Rights more than I do, but can you give us a little explanation onto what it is?
Yeah. So essentially at the moment we have the Human Rights Act 1998, which I think many people would hail as essentially a brilliant piece of legislation. Obviously, so it sets out pretty much every single right and freedom that every person in the UK is entitled to, and it allows you to defend those in UK courts. So this is what the Human Rights Act does at the moment. So say if there was some form of discrimination against you, this Human Rights Act allows you to defend that in a UK court. It also means that it's unlawful for any public body, such as like the government or the police, or like local councils, to go against any of those rights and freedoms. So it essentially protects you as an individual. But then, of course, it came about with the Rwanda deportation flights that were occurring, and those flights were stopped by the European Court of Human Rights. So the European Court of Human Rights are essentially it's an international court, and they interpret a thing called the European Convention on Human Rights, which is essentially loads of articles that again set out human rights. This court makes sure that any member states of this convention aren't breaching any human rights. So they might receive complaints by like an individual or by groups, and they essentially make sure that no human rights breaches are made. So they oversee things like the UK government. So those Rwanda deportation flights, the European Court of Human Rights oversaw that, and they said, wait a minute, that's unlawful, we can step in and stop that. So that's where they come into play. Now, Dominic Raab is essentially trying to push through the Bill of Rights, which would replace the Human Rights Act. It would completely get rid of it, and it would stick this new Bill of Rights in its place. And just at like first glance, I mean, I'm not extremely involved in politics, so for any regular person to read it, it's very, very hard to interpret everything, because obviously they like to use big words and complicated language. They don't like to make it easy for you.
No.
So they really don't like to make it easy. So essentially this new Bill of Rights would replace the Human Rights Act, and at the minute it's in its second reading in the House of Commons. So it still needs to go through like another couple of readings in the Commons, then it's got to go through the House of Lords, and then it has to get royal assent before it would be passed. So the Queen just says, yeah, this is good, you can go ahead. At the minute, there's still a fair few steps left. I think it's been in its second reading since June. So it is taking a while, luckily. I think Dominic Raab was trying to really push it through, but I'm hoping it's going to be very slow and then it won't pass in the end, essentially. So I started reading the bill because there was a lot of misinformation going around on TikTok, various different places, as it does. It's essentially just one big game of Chinese whispers, TikTok is. So, of course, there was incidents in 2020 in the lockdown where autistic and learning disabled hospital patients and people with other chronic illnesses as well were having do not resuscitate orders placed on their medical records without knowledge or consent. And it happened to a fair few people. I know of a couple of people that it did happen to. So now, because that has happened once, people have then been seeing this new Bill of Rights and interpreting it to mean that every disabled person in the country would then have a do not resuscitate order placed on them automatically, which obviously isn't what's happening. It's not set out like that in the bill. So there was a lot of people going around on TikTok making videos to fit a trend that were like, these are the things I could have a do not resuscitate order placed on me for. And they were like making it all into a trend. And then there were people obviously freaking out about it, because what else do you do when someone tells you that you're going to have that placed on your medical records? But people were taking it very way too far and saying like, it's going to be put on there tomorrow. Even if you just have ADHD or anxiety, you're going to have a do not resuscitate order put on your records. And it was getting very out of hand, and that's not what is included in the bill. And it was because there was one Labour MP that said that this new Bill of Rights might make it harder for patients that have a DNR placed on them without consent. It might make it harder for them to get rid of it. So that's one interpretation of it that's been said. And of course, people have taken that and then said something else and said something else, and it's just kept spiraling into a bit of madness. So it caused a lot of stress really on TikTok, and it was stressful kind of for me seeing all these people that were obviously upset, thinking that these things were going to happen to them because of this new law, when that's not explicitly been put in. So obviously, well, there are instances where do not resuscitate orders can be placed on patients anyway without consent, but it's always informed. So usually, I believe it's two physicians will obviously assess the situation and think, is it viable to do this, and they will assess the situation. So it might be that somebody is very seriously ill and it might not be viable to resuscitate them. So in that instance, they then might place a DNR on them without consent of the patient. But that's usually that's when it should happen without consent. It must be informed, and there's a lot of conversations that go, it's not just, here's so-and-so, we'll put it on them. Obviously, that might have happened in some places, but the way that the process should go is that it's very informed, and it only happens when they've looked at other options and they decide it's not going to be viable to do that. And so I think a lot of people obviously see things like that and can very easily get worked up when you don't know all of the information. So that was why I kind of started reading the bill, because I was going to think, well, there's so much panic at the moment. Even if it turns out that this bill is bad, it's better to have the truth out there and have it as correct information instead of people guessing what's going to happen and making everybody panic and be really upset. So I essentially spent a few hours one night running on pure unmedicated ADHD to read through this entire bill, highlight anything that's changed, anything that it might, any implications that it might have, anything like that. And I just made notes on it and then compiled it into an Instagram post, into 10 slides to try and get the majority of the points across. I still didn't manage to get some across, but there were plenty of other organisations that have kind of picked up from that anyway. So I just kind of focused on the DNR bit to sort that bit out first, because that was a bit of a priority. So yeah, that was why I kind of made the post. There was just a lot of panic going round. So from reading the bill at first glance, as to me, as someone that isn't obviously very involved in politics, I mean, I have an interest in politics. I like to keep up to date. So the articles in the bill are exactly the same as the Human Rights Act. So things like right to life, right to privacy and family life, it's like the right to marriage and things like that. They're all exactly the same. So none of the actual articles have changed. It's just how European courts can interpret things and use things that has changed. Pretty much on the first page of reading the bill, you can see that, so essentially it just says, this bill is going to replace the Human Rights Act. And then the next bit immediately starts referring to the European Court of Human Rights that I mentioned earlier. So the people that essentially oversee every member country that's a member of the court, and they make sure that they're not doing anything wrong, basically. So there's like the second point, and there's like 3 points below there. It essentially says that UK courts will now diverge from the European Court of Human Rights, and the UK Supreme Courts now have the ultimate say on human rights. So essentially, the European Court of Human Rights no longer will have say over what the UK government and the UK Supreme Courts can do. They can no longer intervene in human rights cases. So say, like the example of the Rwanda deportation flights, if this bill was passed, the European Court of Human Rights would not be able to intervene like they did with that first flight, where they said, hang on a minute, this is unlawful, you can't be doing that. If this bill would pass, it would now mean that they wouldn't be able to do that, so the government would essentially be able to get away with doing it.
I can see
So,
where this is going, actually.
so you can see why, as soon as that first flight was intervened, Dominic Raab was like, wait a minute, we can push this through quite fast to see if we can obviously try and do it again, which I think is where they're going with it. So it essentially means that, again, in human rights cases, again, European Court of Human Rights cannot really get involved. It's the say of the UK Supreme Court that has the ultimate say on it, which I think is where that Labour MP was coming from about the DNRs, where he was saying that the bill might make it harder for disabled patients that have got them without consent. It might make them harder to get rid of them, because from what I can gather, if that was, say, a case where the European Court of Human Rights can get involved, that individual that's got the DNR on them might be able to raise a complaint to the Court of Human Rights and say, well, this wasn't placed on me without my consent, and they might be able to intervene. But now it might be a case of, if you take that to a UK Supreme Court, they might just be like, well, no, it's fine, and the European Court can't get involved with that. That's what I can gather from where they might have got that from anyway. Obviously, I'm not a well-versed politician. This is just what I can gather from reading through it and seeing what other creators have put out as well, and kind of putting the pieces together. So that's just one interpretation that people have gathered from it. So of course that doesn't mean that all disabled, chronically ill, mentally ill, neurodivergent people are going to have DNRs automatically placed on their medical records. Obviously, you might have one put on you without consent at some point, but if it's done correctly, it will be because it might not be viable to resuscitate, and usually doctors have assessed the situation. Obviously, there were cases where that did not happen in 2020 in the first lockdown, which I think is why people are so worried about it. But DNRs without consent have always been a thing, really, but they're usually informed by doctors to make sure that that is the right thing to do. So essentially, that is the main thing to get out of the bill, the fact that now the European Court of Human Rights will not really be able to intervene in any kind of human rights things, which essentially means the UK government could get away with a lot more. They can essentially do what they want, really, in regards to human rights, and nobody can really intervene and say, wait a minute, that's wrong, do not do that, we're going to stop you from doing that. There are many other things. I think there is one section that refers to that you can only take a human rights claim to a UK court if the government deems it suitable. So I'm not sure how they deem it suitable, but apparently that's what they do. So again, it might actually be harder in itself to take a human rights claim to court. There are also things relating to deportation. It would make deportation easier. There's things like that. It's mainly again about the interpretation of the rights now, which is now being changed. So ideally, we don't want the Human Rights Act to be appealed. It's perfectly fine as it is, pretty much. I think this is just my personal opinion from what I can see. I think they are very obviously trying to push through this new bill so that it would make it easier for instances like those Rwanda deportation flights, so that nobody would be able to intervene like they did with the first one.
Mm-hmm. It definitely sounds like it's very complicated. And then when you look at social media, it sends all the negativity, mainly TikTok. So that was no surprise
Yeah,
there.
definitely.
But it was really interesting to see that, because I know in one of the other questions we said, "What's your opinion on it?" But basically, you shared your
Yeah.
own opinion on it, Lauren. So I think we definitely got it covered. But it's really interesting to see how a law can actually make or break human rights. But then when you
Definitely, yeah.
mentioned about the European rights, the one thing that came into my mind, well, the two things actually. One is Brexit, because since Britain's left the European Union now, will that be the same or different? Because obviously, some countries who have their own laws, they don't have any laws that are associated with the EU, so that is quite tricky. And then another bad example that I would say is that over in America, where they have the ABA therapy and all like the things that are going on, but this is something that's always questionable, because when you look at other countries and the things that have happened, you tend to think of the what ifs, and if the UK government is going to follow the same mistakes or the same mishaps.
Definitely, yeah. I think that's a really big thing at the moment, especially since Roe v. Wade was overturned in the US. I think people are now starting to look at things and be like, wait a minute, like that's not actually far off what could happen here. I mean, I think something related to abortion is happening over here at the minute. I mean, I know there was one Tory MP that kind of gained a lot of attention for saying it was something along the lines of why do women think they have the right to bodily autonomy? That was something he said in the House of Commons. But there is something about the government have very sneakily removed something to do with abortion. I'm not sure if anything will actually come through of it, and I'm not sure how concrete that is. So do not maybe do not quote me on that one, because I can't for the life of me remember what the bill is, but they have very silently removed something to do with abortion. There have been a lot more abortion protests recently in response to Roe v. Wade in the US. So I think now that that's been overturned, people are really starting to see that very easily a lot of rights could be taken away from a lot of people. So I think especially when this came about with the Bill of Rights, everybody obviously thought the worst, because they were like, oh God, like it's happened over there. Is it going to happen over here now? So I just think everybody needs to be very careful, very vigilant with what they're reading, especially with things like TikTok. If people are posting things, always ask for sources, because some people are literally just playing Chinese whispers and being like, well, so-and-so said this and so-and-so said this, so I'm going to put this video out now. But it's always important that when you are browsing things like TikTok to say like, this is great, but have you got a source for this so I can read it? And usually when someone's like, well, no, I haven't, then you can pretty much dispel that as it's probably misinformation, because it's really important to stay informed with the correct things at the moment. I mean, obviously it's very worrying times. Everyone's got every right to be upset or worried about things, because things could very easily happen. It could very easily affect a lot of people, but you've got to stay vigilant and protect yourself, that you want to make sure you've at least got the right information, instead of seeing various things on TikTok or Twitter or whatever that might be wrong.
With that being said, Lauren, what do you think, in your opinion, do you think that there is an imbalance between the Bill of Rights and the disability community? Because is there an imbalance of it, or is the law not going to be strong enough to protect people once this bill is passed? I know you did explain a little bit about it, but I'm just wondering, in your opinion, what do you think on it? Do you think it's true or it's not true? Or
well, I mean, at the moment, obviously disability rights, we still have a ways to go yet, but I do think that, especially the implications of the bill that they have with the European Court of Human Rights not being able to overlook things, I do think that might disproportionately affect disabled people, especially when there's been a few incidents of, I think there was a child that was trying to seek treatment or something like that in another country, and there was something to do with the rights of whoever. It was either not allowed, or there's things like that where I think it might disproportionately affect disabled people, especially when there's loads of cases of disabled people being mistreated in healthcare, things like that. I think then if people were obviously to take that to courts, would the courts then deem that as appropriate? Because that's in the bill. They say that you can only take, well, what the bill says in pretty much exact words, that the bill would stop bogus human rights claims. I'm not sure what a bogus human rights claim is, because surely a human rights claim is a good human rights claim. So I think they're obviously thinking that they're going to cut out all the people that are maybe faking it or trying to get something out of it, or ones that aren't worth the government's time or something like that. But obviously, if someone's claiming a human rights issue, there's got to be a good reason for that. So I do think that part of it might disproportionately impact disabled people, especially say if there was an instance with healthcare. I know there are plenty of people that are still fighting for things. There are many cases at the moment, autistic people in particular. There was a lady who sadly lost her daughter, Lauren. She was falsely detained under the Mental Health Act, many hours from home. And essentially her experience there was not good at all. So her daughter did sadly pass away, and the mother is now fighting for mental health nurses to be much better trained, essentially, in autistic people. So there are sadly quite a few cases like that where there are disabled young people as well that are being mistreated, and then people and like their families are now having to campaign for these things. And I think that maybe human rights claims in that respect might be much harder to actually get anything out of it, especially now that if this bill is passed, the European Court of Human Rights won't essentially have any say over that. So I think that's kind of what might happen.
Because when you think about it, you've got to think about the things that are going to come with it, like prejudice for
Yeah,
being the main thing. And I don't know, discrimination's the same thing as prejudice, but I kind of have a feeling it might be. But then
yeah,
also, you've got to really think that if there's so much prejudice, and if the Bill of Human Rights has a lot of prejudice in it, and if no one has a say in anything except the government that has like lots of power towards it, this is going to be a very big issue. It could be a disaster for society when you think
I
about
think,
it, and the
yeah,
disability community in general.
I think it definitely will disproportionately impact a lot of people, especially because, again, things like the government has to deem it a suitable claim. And then obviously, if it's a claim against the government, there's no one to oversee that. So they can essentially get away with a lot more. I know there are plenty of creators that are in foster care and have been in care pretty much their entire lives. They're now saying, well, what happens to us? What if we're mistreated? The government are essentially their parents. Like, if they were to then speak out about something, maybe try and file a human rights claim, what happens then? Because, well, yeah, the government are their parents. They can't just say, well, because, well, what happens to them? Because they can't really do anything to do with that, because then would the government say, well, that's not a suitable claim, or what would they do? So I think there's many implications for lots of different groups of people. So I mean, obviously, ideally, we don't really want this passed. I think we want to keep the current Human Rights Act in this, because I mean, it's a brilliant piece of legislation at the moment. It protects everything that everyone can do. And I think especially when we had like the crime and policing bill come in and many other things on top of this Bill of Rights, I think all together with these different bills working together, it will probably mean that a lot of different freedoms are limited.
I mean, it's funny how you should say parents, really, and I know I'm going to make the worst joke out of it, but and some people in the government are going to be really, really cross. But I always tend to like to think some of them are parents, but then some MPs are like naughty school children.
I would say most of them are naughty school children, to be honest with you. I would say most of them are.
It's just like, sit in the naughty corner.
They are. That's what they do. I like it when you can see when you can see the speaker getting all riled up, and they end up having to send them out. And it is literally just managing a class of school children. Uh,
But I know it's not the case with like every single MP, because there are ones that are really dedicated to look after like their people. Well, not their people, just their people, but their children as well. And I know that we can talk forever about it, but I know I'm going to have to finish with one final question, Lauren.
yeah,
But definitely we need to do another episode at some
we
point
should
talking
do.
about more laws, because we need
We
this.
should
We
do.
need to talk about this.
We should.
But I was just like, this last question was it came up into my mind because I didn't really know what like opinions are, because political views can be debated. Some people may just be like, oh, I don't want to give my voice out because I'm just worried it will lead me into trouble, or I'm worried if it won't happen. But it's very important to really think of those things. And even though you feel doubtful about the present, and you were a little bit doubtful about the past, really, because you've seen so many mistakes happen, what about the future? What do you think the future will be? Would there be motivation, betrayal, success? Who knows, really? But what would you hope to see in the future for disability rights, Lauren? Would you experience to have some good things, or things to watch out for, or stuff like that?
I think for disability related things in general, I want to see things that are proportionate, really. So again, I was talking about representation earlier, and I mean, I think the current figure is something like 15% of people worldwide are disabled. But then when you look at, say, how many TV adverts or TV programs have disabled people in them, I wouldn't say that 15% of the characters in any shows or adverts were disabled. I mean, obviously, there are things like invisible disabilities, which are very hard to try and represent in a short advert, things like that. But we need things like characters in TV films that are very well done, very well represented, and it's proportionate to the population. So that's one thing I want to see. I want to see good, realistic representation for people of all disabilities, not specifically autism or ADHD or anything. Because I think the entire disability community is owed some actual good, light-hearted representation that actually is a good story for once, instead of disabled people either being made out to be the villain or it turns out into a sad story and things like that. I want to see good stories of disabled people. So that's one thing I want to see, but also I want to see things like workplaces being actually well trained in things like disability, making sure that they are informed by disabled people that work there, because I always think, well, it's the classic case of things like nothing about us without us. You can't tell us what support we can have and what support we can't have when you're not disabled yourself. It doesn't make sense. So I definitely want there to be more disabled people in higher up positions so that we can make these decisions about things, because if it's going to come from anyone and be accurate, it's got to come from actual disabled people. So that's kind of what I want to see. We need more disabled people higher up in the public eye, and we need really good, solid representation. So I'm hoping that is what we'll have.
I mean, it's funny you should say that, because it got me really thinking about the job that I'm currently at, really. And of course, that I explained like in a panel, or not a panel, in a talk I did about employment, and where I actually talked about being a swimming teacher. But of course, at the moment, at my local sports centre, I am a swimming assistant. I am thinking about like doing like the next stage, doing the level 2, because if you do a level 2 in swimming, it will guarantee you to have a teaching qualification in swimming. And I don't really see, apart from myself, I don't really see any other disabled teacher teaching children in a mainstream environment how to swim. And I actually currently assist children who have special educational needs as well on top. And
Yeah.
it's so rewarding to have something like this. But when I feel that if some people are going to put me down just because of my disability, just like, you don't know me. How can you
Yeah,
judge me when you
exactly.
don't really look at me? Try and be disabled yourself. But then there are people who do believe in me, but we need to concentrate on the people who believe in us rather than the people who are against us within the disability community.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the most important things that's going to really help with this is if we have good, solid, non-disabled allies, because I don't think we're going to get much further unless we have people that aren't disabled that can do some of the work for us, which is not very nice way of thinking about it, to be honest. But I honestly think that if it was just left up to us to do it, I don't think people would listen to us. But I think the moment you have a prominent person who's not disabled that starts talking about these issues, people start to listen, because it might be coming from someone that is more in the public eye, and they might have had more opportunities, because there aren't many opportunities for disabled people. So I think we need really good allies to the disabled community to start putting these things in place for us and really kind of boost things like that, facilitate things. So that's also kind of what I really want to see. And it's funny you should mention teachers as well, because I actually don't know of many teachers in any setting that are disabled in, say, mainstream schools or anything like that. So I think as well, especially when teaching like special educational need kids as well, I always think it's important, say, maybe to have someone who's autistic themselves actually set out the ways that those kids learn, because I still don't think it's fair sometimes that there are kids, say, that are autistic or have ADHD or additional learning disabilities or learning difficulties. I don't think it's fair that then the way that they learn is still set out by someone who's probably not disabled and has absolutely no idea what's going on, even in the slightest, in the brain, what their thought process might be or anything like that. But then I think if there's, say, an autistic teacher that might be able to say, oh, wait a minute, well, I don't really like that thing either, and they can empathize a bit on a level. And so I think we really need more disabled teachers, because I think it will just really help a lot of kids, because they'll be able to empathize with the kids. And that way as well, when kids see like, oh, my teacher's disabled just like me, it just opens up doors for conversations that they might not have had before. So I think that's what we really need. So again, I'm kind of hoping to, even though I'm obviously not really involved in education besides being at university, I'm kind of hoping that if I do have speaking opportunities, that I can talk to kids, teenagers and young people that are in education, because even though I don't class myself as like a high enough figure and inspiration or anything, I don't really want to be classed as inspiration for someone. I just want to be someone that they can talk to on a personal level and just feel understood and like someone's in their corner, really. So at the autism show, it was a really good opportunity because there were plenty of teenagers there. And there was actually a really lovely girl there with her mum, and she was pretty much identical to how I was at her age. So she was in year 8, really obsessed with physics. And of course, I'm doing a physics degree. So the moment I stood up on that stage and I said, I'm a physics student at Newcastle, her face lit up and they came and saw me afterwards. And I was talking about physics with her, and her mum was like, thank you for being here, because I can see her in you, in how that you've done it and now that you're doing physics. And it was really lovely to talk to her, because she was going on about how some people at school can be horrible, like there's the popular kids and stuff. And I was just like, honestly, do not worry about it. If they ever have anything to say about you, it is more a reflection on them than you as a person. And trying to tell her to like reframe mindsets like that, because I think obviously there are lots of people that are horrible. People are always going to be horrible, but I think it's, instead of internalizing that, you've then got to realize these people are horrible, but it's not a reflection on me as a person, it's a reflection on them. So that was something I was able to get across with her, because I've dealt with a fair few horrible people at school. So it was really nice to just connect with her on a more personal level and be able to discuss interests. And I absolutely love talking to her. So I am hoping that there are more events and opportunities like that. I can talk to more kids that were similar, because I mean, I think it's done me good as well. Maybe not just the kids that I might be talking to, but it's really been really good for me, because I think I often think that I'm not good enough still, or I might be doing the wrong thing, or my work's not good enough. But then I'm getting to talk to these kids and I'm thinking like, this is brilliant. Like these kids are doing like some really cool things and they've got so many big plans, and I just want to be able to tell them like, look, whatever you do, like I really want to support you. Like feel free to speak to me, because I just want to see kids do really cool things. So I just want to let people know that I'll support them. So I think that's
Oh.
kind of my main message.
Oh, that's really sweet of you, Lauren. I mean, you're right, actually, because it reminds me of the kids I'm working with as well. Because oh, it's so crazy though, because since I started my training back in March, and it was really interesting to see how the kids, since all the time I was here, and there was never a swimming assistant, there was only one swimming teacher who ran like groups and classes of consisted of about 3 to 4 kids. She really struggled, but she had like a little bit of knowledge with autistic adults and children. And when I came on, I realised how beneficial having a disabled swimming assistant is, because it's so wonderful. Because I come out each and every day. Sometimes I get a little bit grumpy, but you know, everyone has bad days. But then there are good days
Yeah.
where you just think, oh my God, I really have achieved something. So like for example, at the time I'm recording, I actually try to engage children in groups, and the children, I try to encourage them to do a little bit of teamwork. It's like, okay, so and so is going to show you how to like kick your legs. Let's kick together. Let's blow together. So it's kind of like playtime, but learning. And as a result, I got 2 kids to get their confidence up in swimming, including one who has moved up a level now. And honestly, I was really chuffed with myself. And then the parents as well, they always come up to me and they always say thank you. And then one of the parents, on their first day, they actually shook my hand. And
Yeah.
I just thought, okay, what did I
It's
get
like that's
myself
crazy,
into?
yeah.
But it's really
Yeah,
rewarding to see how so many things are beneficial to so many disabled families. And I think it's just by
yeah.
sharing our two examples, with me being the swimming teacher and you being the physics student and learning about physics, Lauren. There's people who are inspirational out there, or sometimes they may not think is inspirational, but they feel like they're confident and they can do anything. But sometimes it only takes one step out of the bubble. That's it, that's the right word. One step out of the bubble to make a difference in the world.
Yeah, yeah. So I am just hoping by like small things like that, small conversations, they can make such a big difference to someone. And again, especially like because I struggled with friends and stuff at school, like even though they're kids, like I can really relate to them. So I really like it. Like if kids like will start talking about their interests and stuff, I'm like, that's actually brilliant. Like I just feel like sometimes now I can get on with kids because a lot of the time they're very unafraid to like show you something cool, or they'll be like, look what I can do, and then they'll like go off and do something or show you their interest. So I actually think, again, interacting with like autistic kids, even though there's obviously a really big age difference, for me I think it's quite nice to have kids talk to you about your interests, because there are honestly some kids that are like incredibly clever, talented, and I just like seeing what they can do, and they'll tell me something interesting. So again, I think it's just really rewarding again to just reach more people like disabled kids as well, especially when you can relate to them on such a personal level. So I just really want to do that. I want to reach more people, and again because it helps them, but I think it does help me a lot as well, in the way that I can see my younger self in some of these kids and think I would have loved to be able to talk to someone on a personal level like me now. So I think I kind of want to be the person that I would have liked to talk to when I was younger, but kind of be that for these kids now.
That's definitely true, though. And then it's just making the difference and then securing a future for children and for adults as well within the disability community. And it's something to really look forward to in the future. Definitely agree with you on that one.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we're going to wrap it up there because even though we've got so much to talk about, I know that it
Yeah,
deserves another episode for another time, but it was great
definitely.
having you on, Lauren, and we
Yeah, it was
definitely need to
lovely.
get you back on at some point.
Yeah, it was lovely to meet you. I've really enjoyed talking about everything. Yeah, it's been lovely.
But I know that's you're going to be joining on a panel, which I'm not going to reveal yet because it is going to be a big surprise, which I'll probably announce in the later episode. But Lauren is going to come back in a panel, but then also we've got to try and get her on another episode. But Lauren, it was
Brilliant.
really lovely to meet you, and definitely I'm looking forward to having you come back as well. I'm definitely excited.
Yeah, thank you. I've loved being here, and it was lovely talking to you and meeting you. So yeah, I'm very excited for the panel as well. So I'm very excited.
Oh, it's definitely something to look forward to, really, and it's definitely the topic is definitely the big one as well, especially within the LGBT community. But again, I'm not saying anything just yet to leave it as a surprise. But Lauren, thank you so much, and then until then, everybody, I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Take care, bye.